What is the most durable, natural finish you can apply to a project? Well, one could argue it's the excrement created by this little girl, the lac bug. The processing of what we will affectionately call bug spit results in shellac. Our mission today is to show you how you can easily apply a little bug spit polish to your next project. So once again, my name's Billy and welcome to my shop. And by the end of this video, you may decide that a little shellac finish will be your go-to finish of choice. What? I'm watching you. For us to apply shellac, we're gonna need a couple of things. The main ingredient is obviously shellac. So I have some Zinsser Bullseye De-Wax Shellac, and you can buy this at just about any big box store. It comes in a couple of varieties. This is the clear version. They also have an amber version if that's what you want to get. But the main thing to look for is you want the de-wax stuff. So down at the bottom of the can, it says 100% wax-free shellac. So that's what we're looking for. If you get the wax version, it could interfere with applying multiple coats, and that's what we're going to do today. We also need some denatured alcohol. So this is what dissolves our shellac for our mixture. We need a clean cotton rag to apply the shellac. We need a couple of Dixie cups to mix things up with, and some gloves. Even though shellac is natural, it can get rather sticky. There's a couple of things to know before we get started with applying our finish. One thing is that we're gonna mix the denatured alcohol with the shellac, and the ratio of that mixture is completely subjective. You can apply shellac right out of the can onto your project. The denatured alcohol is going to dissolve the shellac, so the more alcohol we apply, the thinner our finish could be. For me, I am going to use a Dixie cup, and I'm going to mix about 2/3 shellac, 1/3 denatured alcohol. And again, there's nothing scientific about this, so just try a couple of different ways and figure out what works best for you. Once you open the can up, you don't have to stir the shellac inside the can. So I'm going to take a scoop. And I don't need a lot. I would rather remix my stuff later on than make a big batch. Because another thing to think about when it comes to shellac is it dries incredibly fast. So we're going to put our lid on here. That way our shellac in our can stays good. And when we mix denatured alcohol, DNA flashes off very fast. So by applying this, that means our finish is going to dry even faster. This is good and bad. This means that we can apply multiple coats in one day, which is great. We can actually finish our project in one day when it comes to finishing instead of having to wait days to do it. The downside is that we got to work fairly quickly when we do all of this. So we need to work deliberate and ensure we get nice even coats because we don't want to have any streaks and the stuff's going to dry really quick on us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this rag here. I'm going to fold it up into a rectangle that is small enough for me to stick in my Dixie cup. And I want to make sure I get a flat pad here that has no wrinkles in it. Okay, I've got my unscientific mixture of shellac and denatured alcohol. I'll stir it up with my fancy stir stick here, aka my straw. And I will move over my projects. Now this first coat, the wood is going to be super thirsty. And that's fine. So we're going to just try to get it in all the nooks and crannies that we can right now. I am not too worried about runs because again, the wood is thirsty. It's going to soak it all up really quickly. And also we're going to sand this and we're going to apply multiple coats on here. So it's not really that big of a deal. I don't want to be sloppy with it, but I also know that I need to work it into those nooks and crannies, especially in the bottom corners of the boxes. So once I get a coat on there, I then will go with the grain. Always going with the grain. And it won't soak into the wood very much. So it's not going to automatically level. You know, like some things like wipe on varnish will level for a couple minutes. Shellac doesn't really do that too much, especially when you mix it with denatured alcohol. And then I do the bottom of the box. And I'm going around, since I want to go with the grain, I'm going to go around the edges first, getting those nooks and crannies. Make sure I get all of those edges in. And then once I've gotten all the corners, then I will go back with the grain to even it all out. And we'll put it down. Now what you'll also notice when we're doing this is it looks like the wood is wet, but it doesn't look very film-like compared to whenever you use a lacquer or a varnish. That's because we're not going really thick with this. We are trying to do a lot of very light coats, and we will build up the finish. Just nice even strokes right across. I always kind of run down the bottom edge so I don't have any runs, and I make sure there's no runs here on the sides too. Okay. And then the very last thing I do is a quick wipe on the top. That's looking pretty good. Now, we will go with the lid. Again, same thing. I'm going to dip into my shellac and I'm going to try to get all of these edges first. So now that we did all of those edges, now I can come back and go with my grain all the way across. Nice even strokes. So shellac dries on its own quickly. Usually if you use it right out of the can, maybe 15 minutes or so, it's probably dry. With this, I would not be surprised if our finish is dry in 5 or 10 minutes. When I'm making strokes across, I'm trying to overlap the last one. But if you'll notice, I'm not working it into the grain. The shellac's gonna get tacky as it dries. And if I spend a lot of time buffing it into the wood, then what's gonna happen is I could get some smear marks. Okay, now we're gonna let this dry for a minute, and I'm gonna take my rag and I'm gonna put it in a little bit of denatured alcohol. That way I can reuse it later, because just like the shellac will dry on our boxes, it will also dry in my rag. So I pour a little bit of DNA, I take the center part here that was in the shellac, and I will stick it in the denatured alcohol. And we will dry that off before we do the next coat. Shellac can be applied in multiple ways. My goal today is to show you an easily accessible method. Shellac's usually purchased in bags of flakes, and you can dissolve the flakes in your denatured alcohol. You'll find that some shellac connoisseurs prefer this method. I'm also showing you a way that doesn't require a lot of buffing. If you want to really up your game, you could try a French polish. That way you take the shellac, you buff it into the wood using a little bit of mineral oil as a lubricant. But I'm doing small boxes here, and that's a little bit tough to try to do in those small areas. You could also spray shellac if you have like an HVLP gun. You can also buy the cans from the big box store of shellac. I tend to not use them. I find the concentration is a little bit heavy for my taste, but if you love it, go with it. And then one last thing about shellac that's really cool is it's a universal binder. That means that you could put shellac down and then a layer of lacquer on top of that. You could put, theoretically, lacquer, shellac, and then a wipe-on poly over that. So that's what's so awesome about shellac, is there are different ways in which you can use it. I'm sure you'll find some method that works best for you. Time for a second coat. I'm sanding the box with 600 grit sandpaper, and I found that this particular grit works well for me, but you could try other grits like 400 grit and see if that works for you. Some people like to use steel wool with this. I sand everything with the grain, and then I'll vacuum all the pieces and get all the dust off. And then I'll apply my second coat of finish just like the first coat. But as we do this, you're gonna find the wood becomes a little less thirsty, so it's not gonna soak it up as quickly. And what that means is you could get more runs and drips into your finish. So we wanna be cautious when we're applying our shellac. We're gonna be deliberate. We're gonna apply nice thin coats. Remember that since it does dry quickly, we can apply multiple thin coats and not sacrifice it all on time. While our second coat is drying, let's talk a little bit about the science behind shellac. The better we know our material, the easier it is to bend it to our will. Get out of here. Creepy. As we apply more coats of shellac, we're not actually going to be building up layers. Instead, each subsequent coat is going to melt into the previous one, leaving us really with one true coat of shellac on our project. What's good about that is if you have any sorts of runs or drips, we can sand those away and then apply a clean layer of shellac over the top of that, giving us a clean playing field all over again. It's also handy when it comes to furniture restoration. Regardless of how long shellac has dried or cured, it's still dissolvable with denatured alcohol. That means if you ever have to restore a piece of furniture, you can put a couple drops of denatured alcohol on the surface and see if it starts to tack up. If it does, it looks like you're dealing with a shellac finish, and now you know what you're working with. With all that being said, let's get to the third coat. At the beginning of this video, I said that shellac is a natural finish. So let's speak to that for a moment. Since shellac comes from the lac bug, it is natural. That doesn't mean you want to drink the can, however, but you likely have consumed shellac in your life. If you've ever had any hard or glazed candies like jelly beans or candy corn, that's right, usually coated in shellac. Have you ever taken medicine before? Yep, a lot of pills are coated in shellac. And because of this, that makes shellac the perfect finish for kids' items like nursery furniture and wooden toys. With that being said, let's apply our final coat. This is my final coat. So that being said, I want to apply a nice thin even layer across all the surfaces. My main goal here is no drips and no streaks. We're going to make sure that when we apply the shellac, we're going with the grain, because if there's any blemishes, I can't sand those away without having to apply another coat of shellac on the top of it. And as always, we're going to start with our 600 grit and give it a light sanding before we apply that final coat. Our final coat is dry, and now we're left with some options. I'm going to lightly sand it with 2000 grit, and this is going to remove any dust nibs and leave us with a nice smooth surface. At this point, we can say that we're done. Now, some people like to apply a little bit of wax to it afterwards. They find that the wax gives the project a nice feeling whenever they touch it. I like to apply a little bit of orange oil and beeswax. Just remember, once you wax, you can't go back. So don't apply wax until it's your final coat. Check out this finish. Perfectly smooth, no streaks, no runs. I hope this video was educational and demonstrated that shellac's a versatile finish that has a lot of upside to it. It's natural, it's food safe, and you can apply finish to your entire project in a couple hours instead of a couple days. I hear it's good luck. If you like educational content that's also a bit fun, please consider subscribing to my channel. My goal is to make woodworking fun and accessible for you and your entire family. You can also find me on Instagram at genealogistwoodworker. Until we meet again, get in your shop and build something awesome.